The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast, restless expanse of blue that swallowed everything in its path. A ship, once sturdy and proud, succumbed to the ocean's wrath, its hull splintered by towering waves. The vessel sank into the abyss, claiming every soul aboard, except one. A man, battered but alive, clung to a piece of driftwood, carried by currents to an unknown shore. He awoke on a deserted island, surrounded by sand and silence, the weight of his survival pressing heavily on his heart. The island was a lonely place, untouched by human hands. Sparse trees dotted the landscape, their roots tangled in the earth, while the ceaseless rhythm of waves crashing against the shore became his only companion. Days bled into weeks, and the man, driven by a flickering hope, knelt on the sand each morning, his eyes turned skyward. He prayed to God, his words a desperate plea for rescue, for a sign that he was not forgotten. But the horizon remained empty, the sea offering no answers. Refusing to surrender to despair, he turned his energy to survival. He scoured the island for resources, gathering driftwood and vines to fashion a modest shelter. The structure was crude, a patchwork of salvaged wood and leaves, but it shielded him from the sun's relentless heat and the occasional rain. He learned to fish, his hands growing calloused as he wove nets from fibrous plants. Coconuts cracked open against jagged rocks provided sustenance. Each small victory, catching a fish, securing the shelter, felt like defiance against the island's isolation. Yet, beneath his resolve, a quiet ache persisted. He longed for rescue, for a return to the world he had lost. Time passed, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. His prayers continued, unwavering in their intensity, though doubt began to creep into his heart. The silence of the sea mocked his faith, and the island's unchanging landscape seemed to echo his growing sense of abandonment. Still, he clung to routine, finding solace in the rhythm of survival. He tended to his shelter, repaired his nets, and kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a sail, a shadow, anything to break the monotony. One evening, as the sky burned orange with the setting sun, he built a small fire to cook his meal. The flames danced, hungry and wild, as he roasted a fish over the embers. Exhausted from the day's labor, he stepped away to gather more wood, unaware of the spark that leapt from the fire to the dry leaves of his shelter. The flames spread quickly, greedily consuming the fragile structure. He returned to find his sanctuary engulfed, the shelter he had painstakingly built reduced to ash. Smoke billowed into the sky, a dark plume rising against the fading light. Anger surged within him, raw and consuming. He stood before the smoldering ruins, his fists clenched, his heart heavy with betrayal. He had prayed, he had endured, he had survived against all odds, and yet this loss, felt like a cruel punishment. Turning his face to the heavens, he cried out in his mind, his thoughts a torrent of frustration. Why had God ignored his pleas? Why, after all his faith, had the one thing he had built been taken from him? The smoke stung his eyes, and he sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his solitude and the seeming futility of his efforts. Sleep came fitfully that night, the ground cold beneath him, the stars indifferent above. He awoke at dawn, his body aching, his spirit bruised. As he rose, he cast a weary glance at the horizon, expecting the same empty expanse that had greeted him every day. But this time, something was different. A shape, faint but unmistakable, broke the line where sea met sky. His heart pounded, disbelief warring with hope as the vessel grew larger, its sails catching the morning light. It was real. It was coming. The ship anchored near the shore, and a small boat was lowered. Men rowed toward the island, their faces etched with purpose. As they reached the beach, the man stumbled forward, his legs weak with relief. The captain, a weathered figure with steady eyes, stepped onto the sand. The man, his voice trembling in his thoughts, asked how they had found him, how they had known he was here. The captain pointed to the sky, where faint traces of smoke still lingered from the fire that had consumed the shelter. The plume had been their beacon, a signal rising high enough to catch their attention from miles away. They had seen the smoke and come to investigate, expecting to find someone in need. The man's breath caught in his chest. The fire, the very thing he had cursed, the loss that had broken his spirit, had been his salvation. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over as he sank to the sand once more, this time in gratitude. In that moment he understood. His prayers had not been ignored, they had been answered in a way he could not have foreseen. The destruction of his shelter, the loss he had mourned, had become the signal that brought rescue. What he had seen as a cruel twist of fate was, in truth, a step toward his deliverance. As the boat carried him toward the ship, the island shrinking behind him, he felt a profound shift within. The bitterness that had consumed him the night before dissolved, replaced by a quiet awe. He thought of the days spent waiting, the shelter built with his own hands, the fire that had seemed to take everything. Each moment, each hardship, had been part of a larger design, one he could not have comprehended in the midst of his struggle. His heart swelled with gratitude, not just for his rescue, but for the lesson etched into his soul. The sea stretched before him once more, but now it carried him toward home. The man closed his eyes, offering a silent prayer of thanks. Not for what he had planned, but for what had been given. He had learned that life's failures, its losses, were not always what they seemed. Sometimes the things that appeared to shatter dreams were the very forces that cleared the path to something greater. The plans he had clung to, the outcomes he had prayed for, were small compared to the intricate tapestry of purpose that unfolded beyond his understanding. In the ashes of his shelter, he had found not despair, but hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was a greater plan at work, one that was always larger, always wiser, always perfectly timed.